Hey everyone, this is Kieran. Today's exercise is, well, it's looking at how to improve your median biased grip. So that's going to be your grip that's mainly associated with these fingers here, and it does include these guys a little bit with one of our muscles, but we're going to talk a lot about how to use these three fingers here, well, your two fingers and your thumb. So if you've had a hand injury before, or a wrist injury, or a median nerve issue, you might find this interesting to be able to restore this ability. So in my other video on grip, specifically the ulnar grip, which talks a lot about these two fingers, we went through a whole bunch of different options on how you could try and utilize that. Because really, these guys are involved in anything that you grip. It's just about trying to be, I guess, aware of what type of shapes or what type of handles or sizes of things, or you in overhead or underhead positions where you might have lost some of that grip ability. Now, for whatever reason, the ulnar grip tends to be the side that I've noticed clinically needs more attention or rehab or sort of cues to use, whereas the median tends to have a bit more of a bias. And I think that probably has a little bit to do with the fact that thumb is obviously involved in a lot more movement, but then also the specific, I guess, muscle groups that this nerve innervates are a lot bigger, a lot more robust, a lot more able to generate force. That being said, as mentioned in the other video, which I'll link up here, if you lose this grip through your hands, then you might lose upwards of 50% of your grip strength. So is it 50-50? Not exactly. Is there going to be a hand dominance? Yes. And is there going to be a difference in terms of your training history? Yes, as well. So when we're talking about the median grip, we're talking a lot about these two fingers, but what we also need to consider is that it's going to, this nerve, this median nerve, is going to innervate muscles that turn your wrist in like this. So if I'm in this position, it's going to turn my wrist over, this pronator quadratus in here in the wrist, but it's also going to get a muscle that pulls my wrist up into this position here. So these flexor carpi radialis muscles and some palmaris muscles in here. So if we're thinking about the combination of those things, it's a bit of a funny position. You would never maybe quite get into this for a grip unless you're on some rings, for example, where you're holding into here. And that's going to be a little bit more to do with your wrist flexors. But really it's about, can you squeeze with these three things when you're gripping something? Now that median nerve is really going to be biased this proximal interphalangeal joint, so this PIP in here. So this is your distal one at the end, and then your proximal is this other one here. So there's the flexor digitorum superficialis is going to work on those joints, right? And it's also going to work more on the muscles that flex your thumb across. So it means that when you're gripping, you really want to make contact in through this part of your hand here. And you really want to crush whatever you're grabbing and really get that thumb involved as well. So if we use the kettlebell as an example, and then we'll work into a couple other apparatuses, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about some of the pathologies that this might be a part of or why you might have this issue. So I've got a 12 kilo kettlebell here, and the idea is that if I went for a suitcase grip, so I'm holding a suitcase. Now I'm going to come up close in a second, but I want the weight pushing through that PIP, that proximal interphalangeal joint, because I need, now if it was at the fingertips, I'm still going to create some force through that joint and through that muscle group. But if I can force it at there, I'm going to try and bias a little bit of force production through that attachment point. Equally, I'm trying to grip through my thumb. So I'm not just going to let the thumb relax. Now I could, if the weight is a bit lighter, depending on what I'm trying to do. But if I'm looking for a bit of a maximal force output, I really want to crush this thing here, okay? So now if I come up, can see that the bell could rest there or it could rest here. And that could be the difference of a grip like this or a grip like this, and then crushing with that thumb. Now to bias that median, I really want to get these two fingers involved. So if I feel like I've got a median issue, I'm going to start with the thumb and the index and work my way down before I get into the ulnar. And it's just going to make sure that you're really gripping through those guys there. And then I could just go for a farmer's walk, right? So I could just hold like this, and I could let these other fingers kind of get out of the scenario and just really think about crushing, crushing, crushing as I do my walk. And I just walk, walk, walk until I feel like my grip is starting to lose out and I'm dropping more down into those profundus or fingertip muscles. All right. So let's have a little look at a barbell as well and see if that makes a bit of sense and has carryover of the median grip. Got a 15 kilo barbell here. And we're just going to show you how the differences in the grip width can help you bias certain aspects of your grip. Now the other video I talked about is going to go a bit more into the ulnar component, but essentially we're looking at very similar scenarios. It's just that one biases the median a bit more and one biases the ulnar a bit more. Now the one that's going to bias the median a little bit more is a wider grip. So if I come out quite wide, because of my wrist position, and that wrist position is that I'm in a radial deviation, so this thumb is closer to the inside of my forearm, right? If I went this way, now it's further away. By being in here, the bias is to use those fingers. It's harder for me to use my pinky and my ring finger for grip. It's not to say that I can't do it, it's just harder to do it. The interesting thing here though is I can still get that PIP. So I can still, and you'll feel this when you get into the position, I can still create force through this part of my finger. It's just harder to get the fingertips involved, and that's that profundus, and that's more of an ulnar nerve. So at the end of the day, you really just want to be gripping a variety of different things in your training, but if you're trying to rehab it and force the body into a position where you have to use this, go wider and just try and grip the bar as hard as you can. Now you could just start with a static hold, like this, or you could start to work into a movement. So you could do a row, and a nice wide row is also going to work nicely into the shoulder blades. I can show you from a different angle here. And really, you're just gripping, gripping, gripping until you feel like your grip is what's the fatiguing factor. And you might have to go heavier weight to expose that. And you'll feel it slip a little bit into your bottom of your hand, into those fingertips. For hanging, it's basically the same as a bar. We're just going overhead. So you might have a flexibility restriction through your shoulder joint, or maybe your rib cage, that ability for the rib cage to fan out and open up while being able to be overhead. These are all really common restrictions. Or what you could do is change the grip. If you go into a bit more of a supinated grip versus a pronated grip, you'll be able to bias what you're gripping, and there's also that width to consider as well, which we talked about with the barbell. So if I show you guys a couple different grips, I'm going to go narrow grip, narrow just being my shoulder width, and a pronated sort of overhand grip, and just by hanging here, that's going to bias that median grip, right? Because I'm more pronated. Now, moving into the supinated grip, it depends a little bit on your shoulder flexibility and whether you can actually get into that supinated position, or do you feel like your wrist is being pulled out of that position. So if you're not quite there, you can use a neutral set of bars, and usually you'll find those on like a squat rack. But if I come into that supinated grip, and you're just holding, and what this does is it gives you a bit more of a bias to that ulnar portion of your grip. And the difference here is you're not just hanging, you're really trying to crush that bar. And you really want to hold on to that bar until you start to slip out. Now there's still benefit in training that slipped out position. You're starting to get more into that profundus grip, and of course superficialis is still involved. But it's the thumb that I'm interested in. As soon as that thumb gets out of it, we're losing potential power. So really encourage like a crush, crush, crush. And then over time, that grip's going to be able to keep up with everything else. So for example, you see it really often with say like a deadlift or a pull-up, when someone's grip is a limiting factor, and they're not able to get as much as they would normally be able to get out of those muscles, like the legs or the hip muscles or the big lat muscles, because the grip is fatiguing first. So this is a nice way to start bringing that grip in just by a hang or holding on to some heavy stuff and walking around. And then you can integrate that into your bigger compound movements. So you might do your compound movement first in a session, and then as the session goes on, you start to do your accessory stuff to try and sort of complement or assist that compound movement. So that might be, for example, say a pull-up, you might do some bicep curls, you might do some rowing type movements, and then you might work on some grip, whatever you've identified as your limiting thing. And then over time, they'll catch up a little bit. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the pathologies and how this can affect these muscles and why you need to train these muscles if you've actually had an injury to this nerve, the median nerve. So the big thing with median neuropathies, and that a neuropathy being an injury to the nerve, it doesn't necessarily tell us what's wrong with the nerve. So you could have, just like a muscle, you could have different types of injuries to a nerve. For example, the envelope around the nerve could be hurt, or you could have a physical tear of the nerve. Those are more common in like quick thrusting type movements, or jerking movements, sort of tackles in this area. Car crash scenarios, arms being pulled out really fast, things like that. Whereas you could have like a compression injury. So compression injuries for the median nerve are going to be a little bit more about your carpal tunnel type scenarios. Now with a carpal tunnel, what you're looking at is in this wrist portion here, there is obviously some carpal bones. So you've got 8 wrist bones. You've got a row of 4 and a row of 4. And it's not a symmetrical perfect row. You've got different shapes and sizes, and some kind of overlap each other, and they allow all these sort of intricate movements. But what happens essentially is there's a bit of a U created, this tunnel, and then there's a ligament that goes over top, and that ligament sits like a seatbelt here. Now, within that tunnel are a bunch of tendons that come into the hand, along with the median nerve and obviously some blood vessels. Now, over time, those tendons might become more robust and thicken, and then the tunnel itself has less room. And so that can lead to a sustained compression on the nerve. Now, the median nerve is very capable of long, sustained periods of compression. Some of the tests we have, depending on sensitivity and specificity, so what that means is how accurate our tests are at saying, okay, the issue is the median nerve, or how accurate our tests are saying, no, the issue is not the median nerve. We can rule it in, we can rule it out. Now, some of those tests require this position in here because that compresses the tunnel. I can add an added accessory press to compress the tunnel. It's usually a little better if someone's doing this for you as a passive test, and can be in there for a bit. And then there's some overhead tests as well, and some other things that some systematic reviews have some good support for as well. But the point being is that you can have some really sort of sustained compression in that area for quite a while before someone feels some symptoms. And neural symptoms tend to be, tingling, so we could have altered sensations, or we could have unpleasant altered sensations. The big thing that when you're looking for more nerve issues, like nerve damage, is the motor impact as well as their muscle wasting. And so you might see some loss of muscle size in this area here. I've seen it with some hand balancers, for example, just that sustained compression in the hand balance position. And what that means then is you're going to lose some of your thumb strength, and that means you lose a lot of your grip strength overall. So once the nerve heals, and hopefully it has that capacity in a particular injury, generally it can, is that you need to retrain that strength, right? So doing some of the things we talked about. Now, it's going to be relevant to do some local stuff, so see maybe a specific hand specialist physio, and they'll have some specific loading exercises for the different muscles, because there's quite a lot through the hand. You've got various thenar muscles, you've got different flexor muscles, abductors, extensors, there's a lot of muscles to consider. You can get different weighted rubber bands through some grip outlets like Iron Mind. They've got some really good, sturdy, long-lasting rubber bands. But when it comes to being able to retrain it into our compound movements, we need to cue that grip. And if you've had a carpal tunnel, depending on the severity of your symptoms, you might only work your grip within the symptom capacity. So what that means is when your symptoms start to come on, just don't keep pushing into that in an intolerable way. If your symptoms are a little bit tolerable and they're not getting worse during or after, then you might be okay to keep doing that exercise. And you'll have some functional changes in the muscle. The trickier thing with the median or the carpal tunnel is that tunnel, the size in there is somewhat fixed. And so if those tendons have become thicker, which tendons do when they heal, then you might have compromised tunnel space. So you might have to talk to some orthopedic specialists and just get some input there and decide what the best sort of long-term intervention is for you. Other areas a little less common are going to be up in your cubital fossa up here. So just inside your bicep tendon, if you did a little bicep curl, you can feel your tendon right here and you come just inside of it. So there's your tendon and then you drop in and that nerve sits in there. And you might find that that's a little bit sensitive to touch. If it reproduces some of your symptoms, then it might be useful to work on some grip stuff, but reproducing your symptoms isn't necessarily diagnostic of anything. I'd also check out the median nerve slider video I have. I'll put a video right here, a link, sorry, and you can have a watch of that and you get an idea of how this nerve mobilizes, the neuromechanics of that nerve against other tissues in the body. So, a few things to think about. I think the main thing of consideration is really the carpal tunnel and the symptom provocation threshold, and then really integrating this back into your training and your life and making sure that you bring that thumb into your grip and you're not just hooking everything. That's a big thing that I see as far as needing to cue for this area. They've got some atrophy of those thumb muscles, and that's more obvious than atrophy in the forearm. And you need to really rehab and cue yourself to use that thumb when you grip stuff. All right? So being a little bit repetitive, but sometimes that needs to just be sort of repeated a few times to really drive home that idea that you really need to grip. You need to really squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And that's what's going to get you the change. The effortful stimulus is going to create that change. Okay? So if you've got any questions, of course, ask some questions down the bottom, and I'll try and clarify or get back to you best I can. If you like this video, then please hit like below. Otherwise, to check out more of our content in the future, you can subscribe to our channel by clicking our logo over here. And to check out our latest video, click up here.